Before the video kicks off, I just want to let you know the first half of this video, we had some video issues as far as transferring it over like we normally do. So you're going to have some graphics for the first half of the show. If you don't want to see the graphics, then skip to about the 25-minute mark. Of course, that's when it's back to normal. But if you enjoy, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. Let's have some fun with some start, bench, cut. Start, bench, cut is the game of choice today. Amir is joining the show, and let us know in the comments what you would do for each and every one. This is just kind of be like a PlayStation party. Amir, we're just gonna go back and forth, give us some start, bench cuts. Should be tons of fun, and I'm not gonna waste any time. Let's talk about some quarterbacks that are not maybe not top three, but they're in that from 4 to 10 range. Let's start off here. Would you start, bench, or cut Dak Prescott, Lamar Jackson, or CJ Stroud? Of course, one of those guys is a lot younger than the other two, but he had a very good rookie season. Amir, I'm going to base this on the now. Going into next season, would you rather have Dak, Lamar, or CJ?
This was interesting because I hate using recency bias or kind of judging guys based off of a sample size, and so just because of that, I have to cut CJ. I think Lamar's proven in this league the fact that he has two MVPs, and and me personally, I think Dak is a guy who's overlooked, who's kind of hated just because it seems to have fallen short, and a lot of it is due to him, but also Lamar, who has two MVPs, also has been falling short and underperforming as well too. So, and I'm gonna go ahead and lean towards starting Lamar Jackson, benching Dak Prescott and cutting CJ Stroud for now. But this
Yes.
season, that could very well change.
Yeah, no, I would have to agree with you there. Exactly right. I mean, as much as I love CJ and how great he was, we actually ranked all the quarterbacks going into next season, Amir, and I actually had CJ one spot ahead of Dak Prescott. As crazy as that might sound, but I think going into next year, again, some other guys, Dak and Lamar, of course, they're a lot more proven. Lamar kind of seems like an outlier in this conversation, if you ask me, but recency bias. Want to throw him out there because of how we finished off the season, but I would have to agree with you there. I got another interesting one here, of course. Have you watched the wide receiver documentary on Netflix?
Actually, I have not yet. I haven't watched
So,
it yet.
so spoiler for you, some wide receivers that they focus in on are the three I'm going to give you. Let's talk about Devontae Adams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Deebo Samuel. They also focused in on Justin Jefferson, but Justin Jefferson, we all know he's either number one or number two with Tyreek Hill, or even if you want to throw in CD Lamb in that conversation. Out of the wide receiver documentary on Netflix, start, bench, cut Devontae Adams, Amon-Ra the Sun God, or Deebo Samuel.
You know, um, this is tough because I know you've been high on Amara, and I've sort of gotten higher on him, but looking at a guy like Devontae Adams, seeing him sort of be productive in Green Bay, get traded to Las Vegas, to a franchise that has been struggling and falling apart for the past recent years, and seeing him still put up, basically the same levels of production, but while having no quarterback. I mean, he went from a guy that was throwing 50 touchdowns and 5 interceptions to playing with Jimmy G
Yeah,
and Derek Carr, or Derek Carr and all those guys. And
that's what he
so,
wanted. He wanted Derek
yeah,
Carr,
exactly. And I
and
still
then he
to
got
this
traded
day have
away.
no idea why. Right. And,
Well,
and
they
so
were
for
they were
me
teammates in
personally,
college at Fresno.
yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah, and me personally, I lean towards starting, Devontae Adams just because I feel like if I was to grab him, put him on, any team, his play style will be able to translate. A guy like Amara, I feel like his route tree is sort of limited. Devontae Adams can run routes, no matter where he's at in distance, whatever it may be, and so because of that, I go and start Devontae Adams. I bench Amara. In my opinion, the most arguably the most overrated receiver in football, Deebo Samuel. I end up cutting him.
I'm going to give the floor to you here. Of course, maybe mine are just a little bit too obvious, is what I'm getting at here. So I'll give you the floor. Give me a star bench cut because we have agreed two in a row. And I know we think alike on a lot of things in football, but maybe we could differ here. Give me one of yours.
So for my first one, this is kind of interesting because I'm high on this guy, and you know exactly where I'm going with this. And so, for my first one, I'm going, quarterbacks. I'm going Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, and Brock Purdy.
Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, and Brock Purdy. And we're talking about, of course, going into next season.
Yeah, next season, like right now.
Going into next season, it sounds crazy. But honestly, going into next season, saying that Kirk Cousins is coming off of his torn ACL injury. Of course, he's a pocket passer. He doesn't rely on his athleticism. And Kirko Chains is an amazing, I guess, middle of the road, above average, borderline top 10 quarterback. But I'm gonna cut him again going into next season. He might take a little bit of a drop off with his recent knee injury, a bigger knee injury, by the way. So then it comes down to Jared
Achilles,
Goff.
actually.
I'm sorry.
Achilles, actually.
Yeah, oh,
Achilles.
Achilles. Okay, thank you.
Which is even worse, in my opinion.
Especially for a quarterback that's a pocket passer, right? That's what you rely on those for the power. So I'm going to cut Kirk Cousins going into next season. So then it comes down to Jared Goff, of course, and Brock Purdy. One of them is just more proven, and I understand that one of them's been to what 2 Super Bowls at this point in his career, or one, and he was almost there 2 years ago if he didn't get hurt. I'm gonna start Jared Goff, and I'm gonna bench Brock Purdy where he should be. He should be on the bench to Trey Lance right now. Okay, I'm saying that halfway as a joke, but Trey Lance has more talent than a lot of quarterbacks in the league, and if he stayed healthy, Brock Purdy might still be a backup. But Brock Purdy, again, borderline top 10 guy. To me, I had him at like what 14 or something going into the year. You were a lot higher on him than me, but I'm going to start Jared Goff, of course, very underrated. Bench Brock Purdy, and of course, sit Kirk Cousins or cut Kirk Cousins if that's the conversation. But where do you sit on that? I can imagine where number 13 is going to sit.
Yeah, for me, I'm with you on benching Kirk. Kirk is a guy who, me and you both can agree he's been, kind of disrespected and overhated the past couple years. And sure, he's been super productive and, consistent. The Vikings have sort of, as a franchise kind of, fell apart, even though they've had the talent. And so, but, coming off that injury, and Achilles is something you shouldn't take lightly. And, I'm with you, the fact that, I don't think that it's going to hinder him, as much as, it'll hinder anybody else because it's a
But
pocket
yeah, like
passer.
Lamar. Yeah.
Right. And so, but for Kirk, an Achilles is serious. And so for me, compared to these guys who I think are close to him, I'm going to give both of them the edge over him. So I'm going to cut, Kirk. And, I want to, let my bias get in the way and, start Purdy, but, I think Purdy and Jared Goff, are similar players. And, even though in my opinion, Purdy played better last year, I think both of them are kind of guys who sort of, have only performed well in great systems. Jared Goff is a guy who, got drafted high in LA, made the Super Bowl,
Yeah.
Very young. And, he had McVay, he had a great O-line, running game, receiver core. So he had guys around him to sort of, uplift his play. And, he sort of,
Day one.
Right. And so, he sort of, played bad and had to get shipped to Detroit. He didn't really start, proving himself again, once Detroit ended up having the best O-line of football, a great defense, a great receiving core, best running back duo in the league, these great, weapons around him. And so, for me, since they're both in similar situations, Jared Goff has, been in the league longer. And I'll go ahead and start Jared Goff and bench Brock Purdy.
That's surprising because I think if I asked you off camera, you might say Brock Purdy's better than Patrick Mahomes. No, let's stay on the quarterback train though, and you know what? I want to focus in on bridge quarterbacks. Of course, as Browns fans, we know well they're not really bridge quarterbacks here in Cleveland. We had like what 22 straight bridge quarterbacks, so we never really had the guy that was supposed to make those guys before him actually bridge quarterbacks. So let's focus in on some of these bridge quarterbacks here. Really, in the last 15 years, start bench cut Gardner Minshew, Tyrod Taylor, and Jimmy Garoppolo. I have a fun one here. Bridge quarterbacks. I was going to say Alex Smith, but that seemed disrespectful because Alex Smith is a lot better than this group of quarterbacks. But Gardner Minshew's been a bridge quarterback, what, twice now in his career for Trevor Lawrence and, of course, Anthony Richardson. And Tyrod Taylor's been a bridge quarterback for every NFL team. And Jim Garoppolo, he was, of course, for Brock Purdy and, of course, there in New England as well, I guess, technically. Your thoughts on these bridge quarterbacks? Minshew, Tyrod, and Jimmy Garoppolo.
This one is definitely interesting because, Minshew is a guy who's sort of, respected and loved by fans. And he's one of those guys where, you either love him to be your starting quarterback or you absolutely hate him. You absolutely, despise him starting for your team. And so, in my honest opinion, seeing how, Jimmy G, at a point in his career, obviously was in San Fran and he played bad enough to sort of get beat out. But he was still, a capable and solid quarterback to sort of game manage and win them games. And, thinking about Tyrod and thinking about Minshew, I'm not 100% sure, if those guys, would have even played good enough to even, win some of those games Jimmy G won. He made it to the Super Bowl. With Shanahan, which isn't saying much, but it still takes some capability to do that. And so, for me, I go ahead and start Jimmy G. At this point, comparing Tyrod and Minshew, seeing Minshew still be able to win games in
Well, we'll say
Indy.
this. We'll say this because they're bridge quarterbacks, just like overall, not necessarily going into next season because I don't even know if Tyrod's on a roster.
Yeah.
So we'll just say overall, if you had to take their entire careers, Jimmy Garoppolo, Tyrod, and Minshew, and go ahead, of course, I would still start Jimmy as well.
Yeah. I'd go ahead and start Jimmy just based off what we've seen. You know, I go ahead and bench Tyrod then, if it's for the career.
Wow,
Tyrod played well in Buffalo, in my opinion. And
wow.
so, Tyrod played well in Buffalo, obviously, he played disappointing in Cleveland, but you still saw him win some games. And so, you know, I'd go ahead and bench Tyrod and go ahead and cut Minshew.
I'm at this is weirdly enough, we're talking about bridge quarterbacks, backup quarterbacks. Actually, this might be the first one we disagree on. I know Tyrod gives you something that these other two quarterbacks don't. So if we're talking like actual team construction, it probably makes more sense to get a guy like Tyrod so he can give you a different look offensively if need be. But I think Gardner, and I've never been on the Minshew mania train. I've never been on that. Trevor Lawrence is better. He always will
Right.
be better. Anthony Richardson will be better, at least as a Gators fan. I'm hoping so. But Gardner Minshew, I think I would bench him and sit Tyrod or cut Tyrod if that was the case. But Tyrod's going to get cut off of my team and go to your team because he always seems to find a job. But let's switch gears here just a little bit. We can come back to the quarterbacks later on with some legends. Give me one of your positional start bench cuts here. Of course, we already had a wide receiver one, but you can go running backs, wide receivers. Give me one of your start bench cuts.
For me, I was sort of kind of torn to do this because it involves one of my favorite players, and I'm kind of curious to see what you'll say, and so I'm going to go towards defense here, and I'm going to go start bench cut. I'm going to ask you, so would you want to start bench cut? Sauce Gardner, Pat Surtain, or Jalen Ramsey
And we're talking about going into next season, or we're talking careers?
next season?
Going into next season, I'm starting Pat Surtain. I think he's the best corner in football. And again, going into next season, due to his age, probably benching Sauce Gardner and cutting Jalen Ramsey. Again, just due to his age. But Jalen Ramsey, I think I'll say this, those might be your top three corners in the league. And you can argue maybe a Jalen Johnson there from Chicago. He could be in that argument as well. You can argue Amir Stewart over there at Siena Heights. He could be in that argument as well. But I think at this point, just due to his age, I'm going to cut Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I hate doing this. It's kind of like some weeks back, we kind of ranked point guards in the NBA. We ranked James Harden last, and both of us were kind of like, man, like we remember when a guy like that, was elite, and was at the top of the league with no question. And Ramsey's still elite, but it hurts putting multiple guys over him. And so I'm going to do the same. I'm going to start Sauce. I'm going to go ahead or I'm going to start Pat Surtain. I'm going to bench Sauce. I'm going to cut Ramsey.
Let's stay on the defensive side of the ball here. Let's go with the age-old argument. Okay, these might be the best three edge rushers in the game, but let's break it down. Would you rather go Nick Bosa, Myles Garrett, T.J. Watt?
Mm. You know,
Micah Parsons has an
personally,
argument to be in there as well, of course. But
yeah,
and we're going into next season. Let me clarify.
yeah, definitely. Obviously I'm a Browns fan. We're Browns fans, and I want to be biased, but I mean, the one thing I can't deny is that T.J. Watt's production is through the roof. Obviously, PFF shows that Myles Garrett is double, twice as much as T.J. And all this stuff too, and he creates more gravity, but I mean, TJ's value, being able to drop back in the pass coverage while also being able to pass rush, create turnovers, force fumbles, get interceptions, things like that. I'm going to have to go ahead and start TJ. I'm going to bench Myles Garrett and cut Nick Bosa.
I would have to agree. Again, as Browns fans, it's all the statistics actually should back Myles Garrett, which they do because he is highly double teamed. Like you mentioned, he's T.J. Watt is like he's double teamed about half the percent of the time that all these other elite pass rushers around the league are, like Garrett, like Micah Parsons, etc., like Nick Bosa, right? But TJ Watt, when he plays football for the Pittsburgh Steelers, there was a stat that came out before last year that in his entire career, if he suited up, the Pittsburgh Steelers won 80% of their games. Myles Garrett doesn't have that big of an effect. And we also talk about it all the time off the camera, of course, that Myles Garrett, he's such a talented player, but because he gets double teamed in all the big games, it seems like he disappears. And as Browns fans, we're wondering now, Pittsburgh fans might do this as well, but as Browns fans, we're like, where's Myles Garrett? We need a big stop. Like, this is an offense that's rolling. Our offense is struggling. We need our best defensive player to come out and make a big play. And there's stretches in games where even against subpar teams where we're looking, it's like, where's Waldo with Myles Garrett, a guy who you should be feeling his presence on every play, like you do with TJ Watt, like you do with Aaron Donald before he retired. It's just he goes through some stretches where he seemingly isn't on the field. Where TJ Watt, as a Browns fan, every game I watch of the Steelers, it feels like he's making some kind of effort or some kind of I guess great play for the Steelers, like you talked about there. So I would have to agree. But let's go to the coaching route. Let's go to the coaching route. And you have another coaching one, so I'll let you touch on that one. But let's talk about some brothers, and then we'll be Browns fans and talk about the two-time coach of the year, Kevin Stefanski, of course, Jim Harbaugh, and then John Harbaugh. Of course, John is with Baltimore. Jim, of course, came back from Michigan, now the coach of the Chargers. And then Kevin Stefanski. If you're starting a team, now this doesn't necessarily have to be who you think is the best coach, but if you're starting a team, who do you want to run your team, I guess? John, Jim, or Kevin?
So if I'm, starting a team, tomorrow, I'm starting from scratch. I'm getting brand new players. I'm picking a coach that thinks who can, draw the best out of those guys and elevate.
NCAA 25, right?
Yeah. So personally, even though this dude has a good resume in the league, seeing him, go the college route, and, take years away from NFL, obviously he has to come back up and sort of, readjust to that. And so, seeing him also, I mean, he took pretty much a whole decade to actually win in college.
Yeah.
I'm a Ohio State fan, so I'm going to disrespect Michigan, until my last breath. So, it took him pretty much a decade to actually win something. And so, I'm going to go ahead and bench Jim just because, he's been in college for so long. After that, I think these top two, you could talk about a little bit more. I think with Stefanski, I think he's overlooked, because he spent time in Minnesota and also Cleveland, two franchises that have been poverty. And so, but seeing Stefanski, sort of, bring more out of this Cleveland franchise and sort of win, and do all these things, it's still tough for me to put him over a guy like John Harbaugh. And so because of that, I'm gonna go ahead and bench Stefanski. I'm going to start John Harbaugh. I think John Harbaugh is a guy where it's like, he sort of brings that Ravens culture with them. The Ravens every year have a great defense. They're always, they're probably the most physical team in the league, arguably up there. They're always, a smash mouth football team. And they're kind of like Pittsburgh, where it's like, they always seem like they never go away. Every year, the Ravens might choke in the playoffs with Lamar Jackson. They might underperform. People might end up dropping them down in their rankings. And they still come out and end up, pushing for, the second or the one seed every single year. And so because of that, I'm putting Baltimore. I'm putting John Harbaugh as my starter.
I'm going to have to agree with you. So I'll give you the floor here to give me out your next one here. Of course, I'll have to agree as well. Again, we agree on a lot of the same stuff. It's just stuff that's what happens when you talk once a week on a podcast about strictly the NFL side of things. But I'll give you the floor here.
So for my next one, I'm going to lean towards receivers here. And, this is, for the future. This isn't, for tomorrow. This is for the future.
Okay.
Pretty much picking a starting receiver to be a franchise guy, for the entirety of his career. Okay. And so, are you going to start, bench, cut, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, or Amon-Ra St. Brown?
Oh, this is pretty easy for me. That's pretty easy for me. Jamar Chase is starting. I don't care what you do with the rest of them. Jamar Chase, to me, is up there in that top three conversation with Tyreek and Jay Jettas as the third best receiver in the league. So Jamar Chase is starting. Let's get that out of the way. Now, when we talk about the route tree, like the versatility between CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Amon-Ra St. Brown is definitely a guy that you got to keep in the slot. That's where he thrives. He can go on the outside and make some plays, but not to the degree of a guy like CeeDee Lamb. So the question is, do you want your go-to slot receiver, the guy that's always closest to the quarterback, and he's going to be your quarterback's best friend? Or do you want the big-time playmaker, the ex-receiver, in CeeDee Lamb? Personally, I'll be biased. I like Amon-Ra St. Brown. I've watched him since Arizona State. The Sun God, of course, he was there with Emory Jones, I think, maybe for a year. Regardless, I'm going to go with Amon-Ra to bench, and I'm going to cut CeeDee Lamb, or trade him in this case, if we're talking about the future. But again, I'll let bias get in the way, and I'll take Amon-Ra and Jamar Chase compared to Amon-Ra or any other combination But at the end of the day, most important thing, I'm starting Jamar Chase.
Yeah, for me, anybody that's been watching Amon-Ra, since modern day high school, with JT Daniels, Brew McCoy, those type of guys, everybody kind of knew, he could have went anywhere in the country. I still wonder to this day, how his career would have went if he would have went to Alabama or Georgia,
Right.
but instead he chose USC. And so, I think Amon-Ra is great. I think Jamar Chase is great. CeeDee Lamb is great. But for me personally, I'm going to agree with you as far as my start. I'm going to go ahead and start Jamar Chase. I think the fact that he came into the league, pretty much demolished that rookie receiving record. Was could pretty much show that he can be the number one receiver on a potential Super Bowl winning
Yeah.
team.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's a guy who can make plays after the catch, stretch the field out, run short routes, medium routes, intermediate routes, whatever you want, and and pretty much, completely change the game. He probably has the most, deceptive speed in football. And so,
Don't
I
forget though,
probably
he has drop issues. Remember?
sometimes he does.
No. I'm saying, you remember coming into his rookie year,
Yeah,
everyone was saying he had drop
exactly.
issues.
Yeah. Like, and it's crazy
Cut that
too
out
because
real
he
quick.
took a whole year off of football, and Scott's like, oh, he took a whole year off of football. He's a guy who's gonna, come into the league and be disappointing. People were bashing Cincy for not, grabbing a lineman, but I'm like, this opportunity to, to pair your franchise quarterback up with a guy like Jamar Chase, that's a generational talent. You cannot pass the opportunity up, and they made a great choice. And so I'm gonna start Jamar Chase. From my bench, somebody who was, super productive last year, who's probably the most underrated route runner in football. I mean, his route running from Oklahoma to now has been it's like a night and day difference.
Yeah.
Completely different. And so I'm gonna pick CeeDee Lamb. He's gotten better and better. The fact that he put up around what like 1,700 yards, something crazy like that, around 1,800, something like that. While also pretty much I say in the playoffs and kind of going towards the end of the year. I mean, he was like the only bright spot in this Cowboys offense, sort of, leading this team, as a young player. And so I'm going to go ahead and bench CD and I'm going to cut Amon-Ra St. Brown, even though he's still great in my opinion.
Absolutely. You can't go wrong in that argument as long to me, if you the only way you can go wrong is if you cut Jamar Chase, but again, personal opinion. Let's get some rapid fire ones out here really quick. Some running backs here. Josh Jacobs, Isaiah Pacheco, Alvin Kamara going into next season, strictly next season. Where are you sitting on this thing? On this, of course, question because Josh Jacobs' new team, of course, not the receiver of Alvin Kamara, but Alvin Kamara is not as dominant as a runner as Josh Jacobs and Isaiah Pacheco. Again, start bench cut: Josh Jacobs, Pacheco, Alvin Kamara. Where are you going?
This is definitely tough. Um,
They're all kind of in
this
that
is
middle tier.
right. Personally, I lean more towards Josh Jacobs. I think Josh Jacobs, is a dominant runner. I mean, this dude has had a pretty much a terrible all on ever since he came into the league. Kamara and Pacheco kind of benefited off of, coming in with two of some of the greatest quarterbacks we've ever seen. With dominant passing attacks, solid O lines. Pacheco not so much, but Kamara came into a great situation, and so I'll go ahead and start. Josh Jacobs. Pacheco, I say is tougher in my opinion because I mean the Chiefs O line last year was completely disappointing. And he was still productive,
Yes.
still, played well. And he showed, a big leap, from his rookie year, when they won the Super Bowl and the second year when they also won the Super Bowl. And, the Chiefs sort of had to, alter their game plan towards running the football and feed Pacheco. And he sort of anchored that, that offense, throughout weeks in the season. So, because of that, I go and lean towards Pacheco and then I go and bench Kamara, going into the next year.
It's tough because Pacheco is definitely such an underrated receiver, of course, on the field. And I think that, everybody points to his angry running style, but he is an underrated receiver. But I think if we want to talk about just stylistically, I think I would probably start Josh Jacobs as well. Again, I like the player of Josh Jacobs. I always have. And I'd probably bench Kamara just because he gives me that for sure dominant receiving ability. And if we have Alvin Kamara, we know the offense is going to operate because he's made a
Yeah.
career with older Drew Brees. I'm a Drew Brees fan, my GOAT, but Drew Brees was not the same Drew Brees late in his career with all the injuries. He made Drew Brees still look like an above average quarterback. And also, Alvin Kamara has made every other quarterback there in New Orleans look good, okay? Look better than what they are. So, Alvin Kamara, I think, no, it doesn't matter if I'm the quarterback, the offense is going to flow. And I'm probably going to have to cut Pacheco, as crazy as that might sound, but Now, if you, again, you can't really go wrong with either of those, either combination there, in my opinion. While he's getting back into position, of course, Zoom Plus is too expensive for me, or at least I'm just too cheap to buy it. So we had to reset there a little bit. But let's go back into the future here. Let's talk about the running back position, the bell cow position. So if you're starting a franchise, again, going into the future, there's three promising running backs that we've only seen either 1 year from two of these guys, or of course a couple from a guy that I'll start off with, Breece Hall. So the three I'm going to give you are Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, and Jahmyr Gibbs. Who are you starting, benching, and cutting going into the future?
Um, seeing this guy, perform at a high level, and I mean, seeing, even GM sort of, give this guy respect, because him having a terrible O line, him having a lot of, team drama, a lot of chemistry issues, through hard knocks and all that stuff. I'm gonna go ahead and start Breece Hall. I mean, I think last year he single-handedly won them, some of those games, and the fact
Yeah.
that they had different quarterbacks, like I mentioned, a bad O line. The defense is always great, but him, being as young as he is, and being that great on the ground and also in the air, I'm gonna go ahead and start Breece Hall. In my bench, I think Bishop the eye test this guy. Is one of the best running backs in the league. People sort of overrate him. Like I've seen people rank this guy as a top 5 running back, and he barely even got touches last year. But I'm gonna still go ahead and bench him. I'm gonna go ahead and bench Bijan Robinson. I think he's been great. In his short amount of time, I think going to next year, the Falcons sort of, pretty much, boosting up his offense. I'll go ahead and put him on my bench.
Yeah, for Bijan Robinson, it's Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs had a luxury that Breece Hall didn't have last year, and that is a great offensive line, both in Detroit and Atlanta. But Breece Hall, again, like you mentioned, did everything he could, and he got them some wins almost single-handedly. But I think I'm going to go in order. Now, again, this might be just jumping the gun on a guy like Bijan, but I'm gonna go Bijan to start, benching Breece Hall, and cutting Jahmyr Gibbs. As a Gators fan, I don't want to say sorry for that. But Jahmyr Gibbs, of course, he has a tremendous career ahead of him. Let's get back to the receivers here really quick before we have some fun and jump into some stuff like the legends. Let's go with wide receivers here, and we're going to go with wide receiver twos more specifically. We're going to go with T. Higgins there in Cincy, Devontae Smith, former Heisman winner, and then a Bama boy in Jalen Waddle, of course. T. Higgins, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, wide receiver twos. Who are you starting, benching, and cutting?
Mm,
That
mm.
one's tough. That one's tough.
Yeah, it definitely is. Personally, for my start, and I'm gonna go with a guy who's more polished. I think he's a guy who has the most potential to be a true number one, on a winning team. And because of that, I'm gonna lean towards T. Higgins. I think T. Higgins, I think he's a guy who, his value in the trade market is through the roof. And we kind of saw how teams were asking for him, and since he was asking for a lot to get rid of him, because I think he's that special and that valuable. And so I'm gonna start T. Higgins. For my bench, I think this is a little tougher. Between Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle, and it's crazy you brought them up because I was gonna do a start bench cut with those two as well. And so, man, I might have to go ahead and lean towards Jalen Waddle. It might sound crazy, but Jalen Waddle. I think
It's
Jalen Waddle, just with his speed and gravity, what it takes to sort of game plan against this guy, I think, he'd have a lot more pressure on defense than Devontae Smith.
it is so incredibly hard to go against a Heisman winner, especially at the wide receiver position. And that's why I think I might lean to start a guy like Jalen Waddle, benching Devontae Smith. But T.
Mm.
Higgins at 6'4", like you mentioned, has the most potential to be a true X wide receiver one. But I'm gonna nitpick here, and I'm gonna say for the off the field drama that I don't want to deal with, we're gonna start. It's tough. I don't know who I'm gonna start between Waddle and Devontae Smith. You got a Heisman winner, then you got a guy that I'm gonna start Jalen Waddle. I like Jalen Waddle a little bit more, and then we're gonna bench Devontae Smith, even though he's a Heisman winner. But Amir, do you have any more that you want to dive into here before we get into some legends?
So, so for this one, this is for the future. And, I might be
Okay.
jumping the gun, maybe so, but me and also Bakari, we're high on this guy. And so, are you going to start bench or cut, Devontae Smith, Garrett Wilson, or Puka Nacua?
You said Devontae Smith, Garrett Wilson and Puka Nacua. I'm
Yeah.
starting Garrett Wilson. I still believe in the hype of Garrett Wilson. I think he was definitely the best receiver out of that a group there in Ohio State outside of Marvin Harrison, prospect wise. I'm going to start Garrett Wilson. I know he still has the potential, and he just hasn't had a chance to be great yet. He hasn't had that breakout year like Puka, but he hasn't had a chance yet. He's had Zach Wilson and the plethora of carousel quarterbacks that are subpar there in New York. I still believe in the talent of a guy like Garrett Wilson. And then you said Devontae Smith and Puka Nacua. As crazy as it sounds, I just hyped him up a bunch. But Puka's so fun to watch. He's extremely fun to watch, and if we're talking strictly receiving ability, Devontae Smith is probably the better receiver, but yeah, I probably would actually give the edge to Puka Nacua. And I would probably have to cut or trade Devontae Smith in this case if we're talking about the future. But I think it just gives me a lot more size, lot more durability, excuse me. And Garrett Wilson, again, I believe in the potential of him. I'm curious to see what you think there. I know you're starting Puka. So are you benching Garrett Wilson or are you benching, of course, Devontae Smith?
No, personally, and actually it's crazy, in my hot takes coming into this year, I have, Garrett Wilson being an all-pro receiver this year. And, I agree with you as far as Garrett Wilson, he's a guy who, didn't have the, sort of the, the luck and, sort of the kind of
He hasn't had the
um
opportunity of even a guy
exactly
like
right.
Chris Olave. Derek Carr is a better
Right.
quarterback than Garrett Wilson's ever had at the NFL level.
Exactly. Puka came in with Stafford, which Stafford, is completely disrespected. I mean, Stafford still has one of the greatest arm talents we've ever seen, in my opinion. And, Devonta Smith had Jalen Hurts, and so, Garrett Wilson, I think is I'm going to start him because seeing him, have back to back, 1,000 yard, years, with subpar quarterbacks, bad bottom tier quarterbacks, and still be able to rack up a lot of yards, still be able to be the leading receiver on that team and still be productive. I'm going to lean towards starting Garrett Wilson. My bench, was a little bit sort of, hard because, Puka obviously 1 year and, I hate recency bias. I hate, jumping the gun, but because of durability issues, just like you mentioned, Puka's a guy who can, also block, run block, very, very well. He's a guy who
Yeah.
can, also run the route. I mean, I've seen a lot of times, even though he's not as fast and explosive as a lot of guys, I've seen Puka plenty of times, beat guys on double moves, stretch the field vertically. You get this do jet sweeps, he take him to the house, make, plays after the catch. And so, because of that, I'll go ahead and then bench Puka and cut Devontae Smith.
We haven't shown the tight ends some love this episode, any at all. So let's go into the legends route of things. Now, one of these guys is still active, but I have an interesting one for you. Let's go with, of course, I think at this point, there's no doubt these are the top three tight ends of all time. Let's go with Rob Gronkowski. We're going to go Travis Kelce and then Tony Gonzalez. Of course, he's an older guy, but let's not forget that he was amazing there, whether he was in Kansas City or Atlanta. What is your take on those three, man? I guess you can look at their career. You can talk about just a team perspective, whatever you'd like to do.
I'm going to talk about, if I'm a coach, I'm picking guys that benefit my scheme, and I'm trying to win. I'm trying to win right away. And so, you know, this might sound crazy, but personally, I'm going to cut Travis Kelce. Travis
I
Kelce is
think
a
that's
great
the right
receiving
move.
tight end, but the problem with Travis Kelce is that, I mean, we even saw it last year. I mean, there's no reason why you should be a top receiver of all time or a top tight end of all time. Andy Reid has to take you out, because you struggle at run block. Like, there's no reason why, as the Chiefs, you should be picking up, undrafted guys, signing random guys to be better run blocking tight ends than you. That's unacceptable in my opinion. And so, because of that, you know, this is really tough because I mean Tony Gonzalez and Gronk. I mean, one played with the greatest quarterback of all time, and so
Right, right.
so it's really tough. And personally, I'm gonna go ahead and start Tony G. Tony G is a guy who was great for a very long time. The longevity, the numbers, and the consistency. Is with that. The problem I have with Gronk is I'm not gonna hold it against him. He played with Brady, but when we're talking about debating guys that are around the same tier of players, you got to bring that into context. And also bringing the context back that, I mean, this guy dealt with a lot of injuries. He was constantly hurt and constantly beat down. And, his prime, didn't last very long compared to Tony Gonzalez or Kelsey. And so because of that, I'll go and start Tony G, bench Gronk, and I'll go ahead and cut Travis Kelsey.
I think cutting Kelsey, as crazy as it sounds, might be the move. But just for a personal, again, I've been watching football since really in-depth football, right? Since like 2010, 2011. Well, again, I've been watching a lot longer, but what I can remember and what I was really watching the games about 2010, Tony G was on his last leg. So for the simple reason that I got to watch the entire prime of Rob Gronkowski, the nostalgic pick in me, I'm going to go with Gronk as my starter. I'm going to probably bench Tony G and get rid of Travis Kelce. Again, Tony G and Gronk just gives a little bit more versatility to either run the ball every play or pass the ball every single play. But you can't go wrong with any of those three. Amir, any other ones that you have here? Of course, I just wanted to make sure we covered at least every position.
I don't have any for my Legends one, but you know, I do have another quarterback one,
Let's
and
do it.
this one is challenging because I mean the dude made a Super Bowl and he was great in that run, but I mean compared to these three guys, I mean he's by far had the most loaded roster. I mean he's had one of the most loaded rosters in the league and in recent history, in my opinion. And so are you going to start, bench, or cut? Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, or Trevor Lawrence
And we're talking about next season or the future.
next season?
So you said Jalen Hurts, Trevor Lawrence, and who was the third?
Dak Prescott.
Dak Prescott. I'm going to start Dak Prescott. I'm going to bench Jalen Hurts, and I'm going to cut Trevor. Am I?
It's tough to think about between those last two. It's tough to think about between those last two. It's tough.
I'm not going to overthink it. I think Jalen Hurts, has he had more talent than Trevor Lawrence? Yes. I think if we're talking about a future, if I'm starting a franchise right now, I'm still taking Trevor Lawrence over Jalen Hurts. But Jalen Hurts, it's he gives you a little bit more versatility than the other two guys, right? Um, that's tough. That's tough. But I'm not going to overthink it. I'm going to go Jalen Hurts. I'm going to go Jalen Hurts because he's proven more, even though he's had a little bit more help. He's still showed up in those big games when need be. He got them to the Super Bowl, and he was 1 or 2 quarters away, one penalty call away, really, from winning his first Lombardi. And if he did, I don't know if we'd be having this conversation. I'm going to start Dak. I'm going to bench Jalen Hurts, and I'm going to cut Trevor Lawrence. But again, if we're talking about starting a franchise, I think Trevor Lawrence still has a great argument over a lot of quarterbacks here in the NFL. But that was a good one. That was the first time I was really stumped between two options to close out the list. But I don't really have any more for you, Amir. Unless we want to do like jerseys and funky stuff like that. Do you have any more for us?
Oh, actually, I have a coach one. I have
Okay,
a
let's
coach
do
one.
it.
So, are you start, benching, or cutting? Sean McVay, Kyle
I'm
Shanahan, or
starting Sean
Andy
McVay. Continue.
Reid? All right, Sean McVay, Shanahan, or Andy Reid?
Oh, oh. I'm gonna have to put Andy Reid as an assistant, and I'm gonna have to fire Kyle Shanahan. But even though I mean Kyle Shanahan's had the most success as an offensive coordinator or just a coordinator in general over guys like Andy Reid and over a guy like Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan's actually gotten his teams to very far into the playoffs. He made it to the Super Bowl, of course, with the Falcons team as a coordinator. So maybe Shanahan's actually the right decision. But if we just want to rank careers, of course, I think career-wise, it's Andy Reid, probably Sean McVay, and then Shanahan just because of the Super Bowl. But if we're building an actual team, honestly, Amir, it actually probably makes more sense because of what we've seen proven in the past. I'm going to start McVay, of course, and I'm gonna have Kyle Shanahan run the offense. They both are under the same tree as far as schematic wise too. So that would I think makes the most sense as far as like building an actual coaching, I guess, staff. But your thoughts?
Um, this one is challenging because I mean, Mahomes holds a lot of gravity as far as Andy Reid's legacy, but you
Don't
know,
disrespect Donovan McNabb.
yeah, hey, McNabb was actually a really good quarterback too, but
He
um,
was.
you know, I mean, it's seeing Andy Reid, still win. Even though people try to sort of, disrespect his legacy,
Right.
say, Bieniemy was the reason why, they had great, schemes and great, plays that, week by week, and seeing Bieniemy leave, pretty much, not even be good enough to coach in the league, and pretty much getting, demoted, and
Right.
seeing Andy Reid still win with a depleted roster this year, I'm gonna go ahead and lean towards Andy Reid as my starter. And McVay and Shanahan is tough because I mean McVay, he made it to Super Bowl with Jared Goff, similar to how Shanahan made it with Purdy and also Garoppolo, and But I mean, in my honest opinion, if Shanahan had Matt Stafford, on the San Fran team, I personally think San Fran wins it all.
Yeah,
And
they
so,
probably have two
seeing
Super Bowls at this point.
right, and seeing Shanahan, make it, multiple times, as that coordinator with Jimmy G and Brock Purdy, in a tough NFC conference as well, just like McVay did, and seeing, the Niners, every single year, make a push. And it's even crazy to think that, I mean, the Niners with Jimmy G and with a injury depleted team, I mean, in that 2021 run, I mean, they were a couple plays away from beating Sean McVay and the loaded Rams team, with having like a 10-7 record that year. And so, I'm gonna go ahead and lean towards benching Kyle Shanahan and cutting Sean McVay.
Sean McVay, of course, just holds a special place in my heart. Last year, Amir, you of course still have the screenshot because, of course, you like to bring up my downfalls. Last year going into the season, so 2 years ago, right? My first off season on the channel, I had some bold predictions, and I said the Rams, of course, after things kind of fell apart after the Super Bowl year, it looked like they were going to be the worst team in the league, and I was like, okay, with Cooper Kupp's injury, this team's going to suck, and Sean McVay just had a kid at the time, so I was like, maybe he takes a step away. So I was actually rooting for the Rams to be bad. Sean McVay to retire, I guess temporarily, and go spend time with his family. So of course I had a wild prediction that he was going to retire after 2 years ago, and then come back and be the Browns coach. Again, that's a pipe dream, but that was I like Sean McVay that much, where I'm coming up with crazy scenarios like that. So he would be my coach over anybody in the league, in all honesty. And now he's still the second youngest coach in the league. Gerard Mayo now took over. But before we get out of here, the last thing I want to say before we close out the show is rest in peace, Jacoby Jones. Of course, Amir, we talked about it before the show. This is a guy that he single-handedly almost got that team to the Super Bowl and won them that Super Bowl ring in that magical Joe Flacco and Jacoby Jones year. But he passed away this morning. Of course, we're recording this on Sunday before you guys see it. Just a legendary player in his own right for what he did in that time period for the Ravens. And of course, some other stops as well. We're not sure what happened, but condolences go out to his family. Amir, any thoughts about the player, Jacoby Jones, and any favorite memory that you have from him?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest memory is, obviously us as Browns fans, we absolutely despise Baltimore. But, one thing, the one thing I can respect is good football, and, good talent, good production. And, especially me playing football, I can always give props to somebody that's actually, a great player. And, I mean, the biggest memory is, watching, being a young kid, me and my dad up in our attic, our giant flat screen TV, watching, that playoff game, Denver versus, Baltimore. Exactly, with Holiday, and Jacoby Jones and Joe Flacco, seeing Jacoby, catch that touchdown pass, that right there was one of the greatest memories I had watching football growing up.
I would have to piggyback off of that because that was just such an amazing moment. Of course, the Ravens, like you mentioned, we like good football at the end of the day. We're Browns fans, but at the very bottom of it, right? At the core of our fandom, we're football fans first, right? Because again, we love the sport. But I think that play, of course, sticks out like a sore thumb. Also, of course, his Super Bowl returning kick in the Super Bowl after the lights went out, that was crazy. But I think another fun one was the touchdown that he caught in the Super Bowl when he made those two defenders miss and he had
Yeah.
the spin move and he dove into the end zone. Uh, Such an amazing player. He's not going to be in the Hall of Fame, but that's not to discredit the player of Jacoby Jones. He was such a great player in his time and one of the most fun to watch, even though he was on a division rival. So again, condolences go out to his family. But any last thing you want to touch on here, Amir? Again, different episode today, no graphics, just us talking. Any last thoughts here before we get out of here?
No thoughts. I thought this is one of the most fun episodes, and coming up, we've got some more fun stuff to do, so I'm ready.
And Jeopardy next week. So should be tons of fun and brush up on some history, Amir, there. But until next week, again, we're on the road to 20,000 subscribers. We just gained like 100 subscribers last night. As crazy as it sounds, the video on Tuesday from last week kind of popped off. So if you're new to the channel, again, welcome. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell a friend on the road to the next big milestone. But until next week, stay happy, stay healthy, and of course, hug your loved ones.